So my name's Kevin Doyle. I'm 64 years of age. I'm living currently in Cork City, and I was also born here, Cork City being in Ireland. My father was a factory worker. He worked for Dunlop Tires. My mother stayed at home most of her life. She was a home worker. Uh, our family my mother and father both were country people, and they moved into the city, I suppose, for a lot of good reasons to make a better life for themselves. Yeah, we our upbringing was grand. We were comfortable enough because my father had a steady job. Yeah, I went to Catholic school. I think probably I was thinking about it. Catholic school was probably, most people would have gone to Catholic school here, but it was probably my most early introduction to my distaste for authoritarianism. There was, I think, looking back on it, both at primary and secondary level, there was a lot of brutality in the schools that I was in. I was at the end of some of it, but I also witnessed a good deal of it. Today, there's a lot more acknowledgement now of what was going on in the schools in Ireland. But I think the general sort of authoritarian mentality of the teachers and their general brutality was something that really was very difficult to deal with as a child and growing up. And that was one of the, in particular, stuff I saw meted out by Christian brothers and various people of the Catholic faith was particularly objectionable. I think probably had an early impact on me. I certainly somewhat quite traumatic, really. I was kind of always interested in history and politics, and at home there was a lot of politics talked around the table. When I was kind of going into my early teens, there was a very significant event that was happening in Ireland, which was the troubles in the north of Ireland. Really, Ireland had been partitioned, and there was a big civil rights mobilization around, influenced to some extent by what had happened in the States around getting one person, one vote. And the loyalist community there had really reacted very strongly, and then the British Army had come in. So there was a lot of what are now called the Troubles was starting. There was a lot of that on the news and TV, so you would see. And then Bloody Sunday was a particular event where the British Army shot 13 people. And I can remember that being really discussed at home, and people were very angry about it. And those were probably my earliest sort of awarenesses of the kind of political environment I was growing up in. And I was very interested in history and politics and stuff. So at school, there was a lot of us school kids, we would talk about these things and about different ideas. But it was very general in those early days, apart from one kind of lucky thing that had happened to me. A lot of Irish families had people who immigrated abroad, and I had an uncle in London, and myself and my brothers used to be sent over to him. Yeah, maybe summertime for a couple of weeks, and I went in a number of times. But he often took us to Speaker's Corner in London, which was an area where you had sort of people of all different political hues and shades of opinion would get up and talk about what they thought of the world. And I found it absolutely brilliant. We would go there every Sunday, maybe for 2 or 3 hours, listen to people. And that's where I first came across people in the Communist Party, people, the PLO had someone there. But I also came across the earliest sort of expositions on anarchism. A particular guy was Jim Huggins. He was a very articulate exponent of anarchism and very funny. And that would be one of my first sort of awarenesses of anarchist ideas as a broad body of ideas. But by the time I was ending school, I was generally in a left-wing direction, but I was that was as far as it went. Really, I was more aware of the ideas and so on. By the time when I went to university, then it kind of changed because I got involved with the student union, and because of the general politics that was going on around the troubles in the north, there was a lot of things happening that you could get involved in. I was involved in an early support work for a strike by catering workers at the university, and that drew me further into a kind of a political milieu at the university. And from that, a number of us who were broadly socialist got together and decided we should try and form a society at the university that would sort of explain what socialist ideas were. And there was about 8 or 9 people in this, older students, younger students, and it was a very educational group of people to be among. And it was in that sort of milieu that I first really heard the arguments about Marx and Bakunin and about the differences between anarchism and Marxism. And in that sense, I first became really aware of the kind of body of ideas and also why there was such a significant and important difference between them. And I began to find myself more and more drawn to the anarchist understanding of what revolution should be and about anti-authoritarianism as part of socialism. So it was probably there really at university I got really first got a sense that it was towards anarchism that my affiliations would lie. I interestingly enough, just at the time when I finished college, I took a year off. I didn't know what to do, and I went over to New York. And actually, it was while I was there that I met some of the anarchists who were active in New York, including Mitch Miller, and I found chatting to them and hanging out with them very useful and informative. They were really nice people to be around, very friendly. But I got a much better sense of what an organized anarchist presence might look like, and I liked the way they operated and their general camaraderie. There was nothing like that in Ireland at the time. There was a lot of authoritarian political organisations of the old tradition, Sinn Féin, the Workers' Party, with kind of a more Stalinist framework, and there was a number of Trotskyist organisations, but there was really very, very little anarchist presence at all, apart from a couple of individuals here and there. So I certainly came back from the States that time thinking, it would be great to try and have to have an organisation, because it seemed to be that through organisation you could really achieve something, move things forward a bit rather than be talking in abstract. The left in Ireland was never very strong, but what there was generally of the authoritarian format, and that was just the way it was. There was not a real presence of libertarian ideas and what anti-authoritarianism would look like. And I gradually, when I came back, I kind of got hooked up with a number of other anarchists in Dublin and Belfast. And really, for the first time, we talked about the situation in Ireland. And the left in Ireland, some of the more progressive sides of it looked to the Soviet Union as a model for a new society. And, it was almost hard at that time to say to people, look, there's flaws with the Soviet Union. You need only go back to the early anarchist activists who had gone, to Russia, Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, to hear about what they had experienced now in 1980. The Soviet Union was bizarrely a beacon to many, but when you looked at it up closer, you realized it was a very authoritarian form of socialism. So we really felt, look, socialism, if it's got to grow, if it's got to build roots in Ireland, it should be more of the anarchist type. And we were very kind of clear that look, we should try and set up an anarchist organization, and we should try and really embrace some of the really good aspects of anarchism, which is, a non-hierarchical organizing, horizontal participatory democracy, more sort of inclusive organization, rather than one where, you're told what to do. You go off and do this. You're the election's coming up. You just go and sign up people to vote at that. We thought, no, there has to. It's much more than that, and as a real idea. And we certainly, us early anarchists here in Ireland, were very motivated by the idea of trying to rekindle what we felt was the real roots of socialism, which is from the bottom up workers' movement that would fight all authoritarianism. So we were very keen to try and build an anarchist presence in Ireland, and to we felt we would be successful if we did it, if we were more coherent, if we banished some of these ideas that people often associate with anarchism, that it's like, it's about disorganization, it'll lead to chaos and things. So we generally, a number of us got together over a period of time, discussed a lot of principles and ideas, and looked at what we agreed with and what we didn't agree with, and we formulated a kind of a program. And on the basis of that, we set up an organization there in 1984, the Worker Solidarity Movement, which was allied with the kind of platformist thinking in anarchism. And we set about really, in the decades after that, trying to build that up. And it was a very positive experience in many ways. It was a very ideas-centered organization. It published a newspaper, got involved in support work for strikes, helped people where they were active. A big problem in Ireland at the time still then was the Catholic Church. So we fought for many of the reforms that eventually came to fruition, but they were, as with so much activism, there's a lot of trench work that has to be done over the years. And as anarchists, we were at the forefront of that, and trying to do as much as we could, while saying to people, there's more, we should try and overthrow capitalism, and we should try and create an entirely different society that's non-hierarchical and free. We were involved in many issues. The class struggle was very important for us. We felt it was a central idea that it was a central struggle, first of all, but it was also central to trying to have some power and trying to overthrow capitalism. But Ireland at that time was a very difficult place because there was a lot of immigration. People who had jobs were really worried about losing their jobs. So people were quite afraid, and organizing for a more revolutionary solution to the problem was difficult. And, I think we all learned the hard way that it was much easier to talk about building a revolutionary movement than it was to do it in practice. It was really slow work, and it took its toll on people in terms of, their ability to sustain activism over long periods of time, and that sort of a thing, but we had some big successes. We played a big role in what was here really a struggle around abortion rights. There had been a referendum in the 80s which had imposed a constitutional ban on abortion in Ireland. The Catholic Church had led that, and they had been successful, and it was a real lock on bringing about any change through the legislature. And so there was campaigns, lots of Irish women, girls, in all sorts of different situations, victims of violence, rape, just people who didn't want to have other children, had to go to England and further afield. And there was some dreadful tragedies. And there was always resistance to this, and a willingness to try and we have to overturn this, repeal the Eighth Amendment. And gradually, I mean, many anarchist activists were involved in that. We all did our bit, and we were ultimately successful there. And then other campaigns we were involved in was, around the water. There was a lot of local-based community campaigns around taxes and, imposition of what were really sort of class taxes on working class people. And we were involved in a lot of campaigns to try and resist them and to try and sort of, I suppose, convince other people on the left that the solution wasn't to elect socialist TDs or socialist MPs, representatives into the parliament. The solution was to build a more grassroots, large oppositional movement to capitalism. So we were busy in these campaigns, but we were always trying to say the solution is in a grassroots movement for revolutionary change. So they were kind of was some of the broad strokes of what I was involved with personally, and that was all through the organisation Workers' Solidarity Movement, which was probably the most active anarchist organisation in the country over about 3 decades anyway, certainly, Well, I think our ideas are, as important as ever, perhaps more so, because we're certainly at a period of time where there's a lot of pessimism about the situation in the world. And there is this idea that, well, even if you could get rid of anarchism, or if you could get rid of capitalism, is there, what's the alternative? Is there an alternative? Is there any alternative possible? And I think anarchism has a really important role now to say to people, look, there is a way to live that involves people all having a decent life. It has at its core the idea of freedom, and that is possible and could be achieved, and here are the ways to do it. So I think anarchism offers a sort of a way forward, and also offers a sort of a means to go there as well. Because I think one of perhaps the situations that's, of worry to people is that if you get rid of capitalism, would you bring in something that's worse? Would you end up in a very authoritarian society, say like China, or would you, what the Soviet Union had been? And I think that's a very real concern. So the link between socialism and authoritarianism has to be broken, and I think anarchism is a body of ideas that understands why that needs to be done, but also has done it in practice. And I think it's Chomsky has said that the Spanish Revolution in Spain in 36, 37, was a high watermark in terms of the achievement of participatory democracy. So, I think that's true today. There's much to be learned still from how we can get to a point where it's possible to get rid of the state and capitalism, but live in a reasonably good way, free from sort of authoritarianism. So I think, anarchism is very, very valuable. And I think it pops up all the time in struggles as if tomorrow morning you were to get rid of all the anarchists in the world, to be honest, the next struggle that comes along, you'll find a whole pile of them appearing again, because I think anarchism is sort of created by the idea that revolutionary change is a real necessity rather than just a sort of an option. You've hit upon a real sort of a very real concern, because I think populism, right populism is very easy to throw out at people and say, just get rid of this, get rid of that, and put so-and-so in power and it'll all be okay. And of course, it's easy. It feeds off a lot of prejudices that are there and around. And it has the media often behind it, or the media gives it a lot more oxygen. These types of reactionary views get a lot of oxygen, unfortunately. And that's what we're up against. But I think, it seems to me that the only thing grassroots activists have ever done of the left is they've organized locally, and they've organized around where they live and where they're working. And I think the solution has to be based around dogged local activism. And you have to you can't so much counter some of the actions of the right in the broad scale in the media, but you can counter them by confronting them in a local sphere, because you will find it won't be the people who will stand up for workers' rights or for solidarity, or who'll say we need to respect the picket. I mean, I think the issue around solidarity work among trade unions, syndicalists, is vital to rebuilding the movement that has brought big changes in the past. And I think many socialists and anarchists are maybe worried that, look, is there enough of us to do this? But it is the place where I think we have to rebuild the fabric of our movement, because it's the fabric that's really got damaged by its association, I think, with people going into power who just betrayed the promises they made to working class people. I guess it would be the left Democrats in the States, but there's been a lot of socialists here and say around Europe who've gone into power and they've imposed austerity on working class people, and that's damaged their standing among workers and in working class communities. And we can't rebuild that except by rebuilding trust, and that has to be done face to face. It seems to me, anyway. We would have had an example of it here. Say we were involved in quite a large campaign, which we won unusually, but it was around the water charges, it was an imposition of a tax on working class communities following the big crash in 2008. And really, it took a lot of years for people to really believe they could resist that tax. And it was won really on a community by community basis. Some places didn't resist it, but in those areas where there was resistance, people were prepared to work with them and try and extend the amount of resistance bit by bit. And in that way, the government had to back down in the end, where they were afraid of, a larger resistance maybe. So I think local activity and local action can pay off, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. There's a certain element of, we know there's huge inequality now in the world. It's massive, and it's even getting out of hand compared to a lot of the people who believe in inequality. And I think one of the things is that a lot people don't see the wealthy where they live. The wealthy live elsewhere and live in different places. What they do see is they see people who are competing for jobs and housing. Housing's a huge issue here now at the moment. And it's very easy with some people to say to them, oh, the problem is those people who've come here, not the very wealthy who they can't see. And I think we have to draw attention to the fact that the massive wealth that's there, that maybe it's around landlordism or landlords, maybe it's simply around the companies that are employing people. We have big Apple computers here in Cork. We have a lot of pharma companies, really, really profitable companies, massive. There's very little fire ever directed at them. It's directed at people who actually are doing really essential work. I know you notice, it's often many of the migrants are doing such essential work in hospitals, and without them, a lot of the health services would fall apart, wouldn't this country anyway. So I think we have to try and direct, we have to bring information, and we have to direct more of our anger and help direct it towards the wealthy. They are the target, and they are the people who are causing the problem. And I think, again, it we are at a disadvantage now because of the media having such an amount of power. And the media is not going to direct any attention at the super wealthy. It's not going to direct attention at the absurd things they waste their money on when there's people, with nothing here in other parts of the city. So the media can't help us. And it's an example of why we do need our own media services, and we do need our own means to distribute our media, because we have to combat those ideas that are coming from above and that are telling people it's not us wealthy that are your problem, it's those migrants, or it's those people there who supposedly aren't working, So it's a really important battle to try and focus correctly on, and again, it's about drawing attention to the massive inequality that's now there, and that's getting worse. So it's absolutely going to get even worse over the next while, unless the likes of us do something about it.